The string quartet's final note trembled through the air as guests rose to their feet, cameras flashing. Frida Jackson stood quietly in the back pew, her hands clasped around a bouquet she didn't remember holding. The church smelled of lilac and polished wood, and the air shimmered with expensive perfume and whispered envy. Her son Tato stood at the altar, his smile trembling like a candle in wind. Sophia Sterling, his bride, glowed in ivory silk, her veil trembling as she reached him. The ceremony was flawless. The kind that money buys. The kind where every detail flowers, vows, the choir's harmonies felt rehearsed 1,000 times. Frida's heart swelled with pride and fear at once. When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. Flashbulbs burst. Frida clapped too, but inside her chest, something ached out at the reception. The chandeliers cast gold rain across the country club ballroom. Waiters glided through the crowd, carrying champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Laughter rippled from the polished tables where the Sterling family sat. At the center of it all, Humphrey Sterling, the father of the bride, stood with a drink in hand. His diamond cufflinks glinting beneath the lights, he tapped his glass for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his baritone confident, smooth. "Let's raise a toast to my daughter Sophia and to—" He paused, glancing at Tato, then smirked. "The young man she insists on calling her husband." A few polite chuckles. Frida froze. Humphrey continued. "Marriage is complicated, especially when one partner comes from a family that doesn't quite understand what it means to live at a certain level." His grin widened. "But my daughter has always been generous. She has a big heart, maybe too big, because only she could see something in—" He swirled his glass. "Well, and someone who still believes hard work is enough to buy respect." A ripple of discomfort swept through the crowd. Tito's jaw tightened. Sophia's eyes widened in panic. Frida felt the blood drain from her face. The man wasn't drunk, he was deliberate. His insult wasn't careless, it was carved out. Then came the final blow. "My daughter married an honest man, yes," Humphrey said, lifting his glass high. "But sometimes honesty isn't enough. Sometimes love blinds us to the truth. And sometimes," he laughed, the sound cruel, "it makes us do idiotic things." Laughter, uneasy and forced. Frida's ears roared. She saw her son's face, his pride crumbling behind his smile, his hands clenched at his sides. She saw Sophia whisper, "Dad, please," but Humphrey waved her off. Something inside Frida snapped. The years she'd spent holding her tongue, surviving humiliation, keeping peace, they all dissolved into one pulse of rage and heartbreak. She stood. "Good evening," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "My name is Frida Jackson. I'm Tito's mother." The room fell silent. 1,000 eyes turned toward her. The band stopped mid-note. Even the waiters froze. "A few minutes ago," she continued, "Mr. Sterling called my son an idiot. In front of you all. In front of his own daughter on their wedding day." Her hands shook, but her tone grew stronger. "My son is not an idiot. He is an honest, hard-working, upright man, a man who pays his debts, who keeps his word, who respects women, who loves with his whole heart." She turned toward Humphrey, her eyes steady. "But you, Mr. Sterling, you wouldn't know what it means to be a real man." Gasps echoed across the hall. Humphrey's face darkened, wine red. "How dare you?" "I dare," Frida said, her voice rising, "because I have proof." She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers bound with trembling fingers. "For the past few weeks," she said, "I've investigated your life, and I've found things that everyone here deserves to know." Mrs. Sterling rose, pale as her pearls. "What are you saying?" Frida's voice cut through the silence like glass. "Humphrey Sterling has 2 families." The room erupted gasps, whispers, chairs scraping the floor. "He has a wife here, Frida gestured toward Mrs. Sterling. And another woman, Veronica Campus, with whom he has 2 children, a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. Mrs. Sterling covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Humphrey lunged toward Frida, but she sidestepped him. That's a lie. She's insane. Frida raised the photos high. A lie? I have pictures, addresses, bank receipts. She fanned the papers toward the crowd. He pays for Veronica's apartment, her children's school, their clothes, everything. With company money. Money from Sterling and Associates. Murmurs turned into outrage. Executives at nearby tables looked at each other pale. But that's not all, Frida said, voice steady as steel. Mr. Sterling is also a thief. Shut up, Humphrey bellowed. 2 years ago, your company received $25 million from the government to build 120 affordable homes. Frida's eyes locked on his. You built 40. You stole the rest. A storm of voices filled the ballroom. There are families who paid deposits. Frida shouted, who waited years and never received their homes because of you. Humphrey tried to push through the crowd, but guests surrounded him. I demand proof. Frida handed copies of documents to the nearest guests. Here it is. Bank statements, transfers, photos, everything. Mrs. Sterling sobbed. Sophia clung to her, trembling. Tato stood frozen, eyes wide with shock. The company is bankrupt, Frida said. It owes over $12 million. There are repossessions, lawsuits, and an ongoing investigation by the Anti-Corruption Bureau. Mr. Sterling will be arrested soon, because justice, though slow, always comes. She stepped closer. You called my son an idiot, but the real idiot is you, because you built your life on lies. And lies, she said quietly, always crumble. Frida placed the microphone on the stage, stepped down, and walked to her son. His face was pale, tears blurring his vision. She wrapped her arms around him as the ballroom exploded in chaos behind them. The night of the wedding taught me that love can illuminate and destroy 2 families at once. But the roots of that night stretched back months before the ceremony, to a moment of quiet joy that first carried a whisper of warning. It was January, bitter cold outside. I remember steam rising from the mugs of spiced coffee my son and I shared every evening. Mom, her name is Sophia, he said, smiling that boyish smile I hadn't seen since his college graduation. She's different, smart, funny, ambitious. I studied him. Tato, 28, a civil engineer with a modest salary but enormous heart, had always been serious, steady, never flighty with girls. And what does she do? I asked, stirring my cup. She is studying architecture, about to graduate. Her dad owns a construction firm, Sterling and Associates. Something flickered inside me. Sterling. The name struck a faint, uneasy chord. Have you met her family? I asked. Not yet, he said, but I'd like you to meet her first. Can I bring her Sunday? That Sunday she came. Sophia Sterling. Long dark hair, warm brown eyes, dressed simply but elegantly. She brought flowers, hugged me, and spoke softly. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Jackson. I served my chicken and rice, the dish that always made my children feel at home. Sophia helped set the table without being asked, her movements graceful but nervous. Over dinner, she spoke of dreams, designing sustainable housing for low-income families, wanting her work to mean something. I liked her immediately until her voice faltered. My dad's demanding, she confessed. He expects perfection grades, career, even marriage. He says a man should prove himself before he's worthy. And what does he think of my son? I asked carefully. I haven't told him yet, she admitted, glancing down. Tato frowned. Sophia, why? Because my dad doesn't trust people who don't come from money. I set my fork down. My son comes from honesty, not money. And that's worth more than gold. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I know, Mrs. Jackson. That's why I love him. I smiled, but unease coiled in my gut. A man like Humphrey Sterling, powerful, prideful, could turn love into a weapon. Months passed. The two became inseparable. Tato came home radiant, talking about her nonstop. Mom, she doesn't care that I rent. She believes in building a future together. I nodded, but the unease deepened. One rainy evening, he told me he'd dined at the Sterling's mansion. Her father grilled me about money, my salary, savings, property. When I told the truth, he said, my daughter's used to a certain standard. Not everyone can provide that. My fists clenched. And Sophia? She defended me. Side love matters more. He just laughed. That night, I barely slept. I had met men like him before, the kind who mistake cruelty for class. Weeks later, Sophia appeared at my door, trembling. My dad forbids the marriage. He says Tato will make me miserable. I poured chamomile tea and held her hands. And what do you believe? I love him. But my parents, they always get their way. Then fight, I said. If it's real love, fight for it. Let his disapproval be his problem. She nodded, eyes blazing with quiet resolve. You're right. I'll fight. And she did. She told her father she would marry Tato with or without his blessing. He relented publicly, but I knew his pride had been wounded. Preparations began, but Mr. Sterling controlled everything. The wedding will be at the country club, he declared. My guest list, my design. I'm paying, so I decide. Tato gritted his teeth. Mom, I want to pay my part. I hate owing him. Sometimes, I said gently, we compromise for love. But I didn't compromise. Something inside warned me he was hiding more than arrogance. Then one afternoon, while sipping coffee downtown, I saw him. Humphrey Sterling, arm around a younger woman, 2 children calling him Dad. She kissed him on the mouth, my blood froze. I left money on the table, walked out shaking. By the time I reached my car, the truth was already forming in my mind. If he's living a double life, my son is marrying into rot. For 3 sleepless nights, I replayed that moment. The woman's laugh, the children's tiny hands, his easy smile. Mrs. Sterling's distant eyes now made sense. I needed proof, not suspicion. So I did something I'd never imagined. I hired a private investigator. His name was Roy Mendez, a lean man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and nicotine-stained fingers. His office sat above a dry cleaner, the hallway smelling of soap and old coffee. He listened quietly as I told him everything, my son. Sophia, the other woman, the arrogance. Can you find out the truth? I can, he said. A man who cheats so openly usually hides worse. Might be financial, might be legal. How much? $5,000 a week, plus expenses. It wasn't cheap, but my son's peace was worth any price. That week felt endless. Tato buzzed around planning the wedding, showing me flower photos and playlists. Mom, Sophia and I picked white roses. And our song, it's an old jazz tune. You'll dance with me, right? Yes, baby, I said, forcing a smile. But at night, anxiety clawed at me. What if Roy's truth destroyed them? Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Mrs. Jackson, Roy said, come to my office. I have answers. I was there within an hour. He turned his computer toward me. Mr. Humphrey Sterling has 2 families. My breath vanished. Photos filled the screen. Sterling walking hand in hand with the woman I'd seen. Entering an apartment building, kissing her in a supermarket parking lot. Holding 2 little ones, a boy and girl. Who is she? I whispered. Veronica Campus, Roy said. 32. Accountant at Sterling and Associates. The kids are his 7 and 5. Registered under her name, but he pays everything. With what money? Roy slid a folder across the desk. Company money. Transfers, expense cards, wire logs. He's been funneling funds for years. I stared at the documents, bank statements, invoices, forged signatures. And the company? In trouble, Roy said grimly. Debt, lawsuits, unpaid workers. He owes the IRS millions. The firm's months from collapse. My hands shook. The man who mocked my son's honesty was rotting beneath his own greed. What will you do with this? Roy asked softly. I don't know. Then think carefully. If you warn your son now, you'll break him. If you stay silent, he'll walk into ruin. I nodded numbly. Wait, Roy said. Watch. When the moment's right, act. That night, I hid the folder deep in my closet. The city glowed beyond my window, so alive, so oblivious. I sat in darkness, heart heavy, knowing the secret I carried could shatter lives. From that day forward, I played my part, the proud mother, smiling through dinners and fittings, hiding the weight in my chest. Only in the quiet hours did I take out the folder, trace the photos, and whisper, justice will come. And it would. I just didn't know yet how loud it would roar when it did. The night of the wedding didn't begin with humiliation, it began months earlier. With a cup of coffee and a smile that carried both hope and danger. It was a gray January afternoon in Atlanta, the kind that pressed cold against the windows. I was in my kitchen with my son, Black Tato Jackson, my oldest 28. Steady, responsible, a civil engineer who still called me Ma whenever he was proud of something. The air smelled of cinnamon and spiced coffee. Ma, he said, that shy smile tugging at his mouth. I met someone. I looked up from the stove. Oh, tell me about her. Her name's Black Sophia Sterling. She's special, funny, ambitious, smart, different. I could see it, the light in his eyes that only love can cause. And what does she do? She's finishing her degree in architecture. Her dad owns a big construction firm, Sterling and Associates. That last name hit something inside me. Sterling. I didn't know why. But it lingered in my mind like a warning bell. Bring her by, I said, smiling. Sunday dinner. He grinned like a boy. You sure? She's nervous about meeting you. Any woman smart enough to love my son will be fine, I told him. That Sunday, Sophia walked through my front door with a small bouquet of lilies. She was stunning, smooth brown skin, soft curls pulled into a bun, simple white blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans. She hugged me gently and said, "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Jackson." I cooked my best chicken and rice, and she helped me set the table without being asked. Over dinner, she talked about her dream of designing affordable homes for single mothers and low-income families. I want people to live with dignity, she said, eyes glowing. I liked her instantly. But when the talk turned to her father, her smile faded. My dad's. Demanding, she said quietly, pushing food around her plate. He wants perfection grades, career, marriage. He says no man is worthy unless he can prove himself financially. I felt my jaw tighten. And what would he say about my son? Sophia sighed. I haven't told him yet. I will, but he's complicated. Complicated how? He thinks love is for fools, she whispered. He trusts no one who didn't grow up with money. I put my fork down. Tato comes from something richer than money, baby honesty. She smiled sadly. That's why I love him. Months passed and their love deepened. Tato came home humming jazz tunes, talking about wedding venues and flowers. But one rainy evening, he confessed something that made my stomach twist. I met her parents, he said, running a hand through his hair. Her mom's kind, but her dad, he's another story. What did he say? He asked about my salary, savings, if I owned property. When I told the truth, he said, my daughter's used to a certain standard of living. Not just anyone can support her. I clenched my fists under the table. And Sophia? She defended me. Told him I was enough. He laughed. That night, I stared at the ceiling and thought, a man who measures worth in dollars always hides something he can't buy peace. Weeks later, Sophia showed up at my door crying. He forbids the marriage, she said, trembling. He says Tato has no future, but I'll regret marrying him. I poured her chamomile tea, took her hands. And what do you want? I love Tato, but my parents always get their way. Then fight, I said softly. If love is real, don't surrender it. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. You're right. And she did fight. Sophia told her father she'd marry Tato with or without his blessing. He agreed on the surface, but I knew better. Men like Humphrey Sterling don't lose gracefully. The wedding plans began, and Humphrey seized control. The ceremony will be at the country club, he told Sophia. I'll pay for everything, but it'll be my way. Tato came to me, uneasy. Ma, I don't want to depend on him. I know, I said. But sometimes we compromise for the ones we love. But I didn't compromise not in my heart. Something told me that man's arrogance covered something darker, than one afternoon. As I sat in a downtown cafe sipping coffee, I saw him. Humphrey Sterling, arm around a younger woman. 2 little kids running ahead, calling Daddy. The woman leaned in and kissed him. My cup froze midair. I paid the bill, walked outside into the cold air, and sat trembling in my car. Lord, I whispered, what did I just see? If he was living a double life, then my son was walking into a family built on lies. 3 sleepless nights later, I decided I would find out the truth. A friend recommended a private investigator, Roy Mendez, a thin, serious man in his 50s whose office sat above a dry cleaner. The hallway smelled of detergent and burnt coffee. He listened quietly as I told him everything. Ma'am, he said, a man who cheats that openly usually hides more money problems, shady deals. I'll find out. How much? $5,000 a week, plus expenses. It hurt to say yes, but my son's peace of mind had no price. That week was agony. Tato was giddy, showing me flower samples and playlists. Ma, Sophia picked white roses. And her song, Billie Holiday. You'll dance with me, right? Yes, baby, I said. Smiling through the ache. At night, I prayed Roy would find nothing. But deep down, I already knew the truth would hurt. Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Mrs. Jackson, Roy said. I have something. Come now. I was there within the hour. He turned his computer toward me. Mr. Humphrey Sterling has 2 families. My breath left me. Photos filled the screen. Humphrey walking hand in hand with that same woman. Veronica Campus entering an apartment building. Kissing her in a grocery parking lot. Playing with 2 children. She's 32, Roy explained. Accountant at his company. The kids 7 and 5 carry her last name. He pays everything. With what money? Roy slid a folder across the desk. Company accounts. Sterling and Associates funds. Transfers, receipts, credit cards. He's been embezzling for years. My stomach turned. And the company? In trouble, Roy said. Millions in debt. Unpaid workers. Tax fraud. 2 lawsuits. If nothing changes, it'll collapse within a year. I pressed a trembling hand to my forehead. The man who mocked my son's integrity was a criminal. What will you do? Roy asked. I don't know, I whispered, then think carefully. If you warn your son now, you'll break his heart. If you stay silent, he'll walk blind into the fire. He leaned forward. Wait, watch. When the time is right, act. That night, I hid the folder under old blankets at the back of my closet. The city lights blinked outside like knowing eyes. I sat on the bed and whispered, if he humiliates my son again, I'll burn his world to ashes with the truth. From that moment on, I smiled for appearances, nodded through wedding talk, hugged Sophia like a daughter, all while the weight of that secret pressed against my chest like a stone, because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sharp breath you take before justice begins to speak. Week after I found out about Humphrey Sterling's secret life, I couldn't breathe right. Every morning, I'd wake before dawn, sit at the kitchen table with my coffee, and stare at the folder buried under the old quilt in my closet, as if it could hear my thoughts. I tell myself, don't touch it today, Frida, and then I touch it anyway. Each paper in that folder burned my fingertips. Photographs of Humphrey with Veronica Campus, a woman half his wife's age, walking hand in hand through the park, carrying groceries together, kissing behind the tinted windows of a black Mercedes. Her kids, a bright-eyed boy and a little girl with beads in her braids, called him Daddy. Every time I saw their faces, I thought of his real wife, Eleanor Sterling, elegant, quiet, too refined to ever suspect the truth. I'd seen her twice before at family dinners. Her smile had been soft but sad, her eyes carrying something hollow, as if she'd spent years pretending not to see. Now I knew what that emptiness meant. I tried to sleep, but the images wouldn't leave. And worse than the betrayal itself was the money. According to Roy, Humphrey wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was cheating the system. He had used Sterling and associates like his personal wallet, draining company funds to pay for Veronica's apartment, the children's private school, even her new car. Each transaction told a story. Each lie had a receipt. By Wednesday, Roy called again. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, his voice tight, "you'd better come by the office. There's more." The words made my stomach twist. His office smelled the same. Detergent and old coffee, the hum of an air conditioner that didn't quite work. He handed me another folder, this one thicker than the first. I took a deeper look at Sterling and Associates books, he said, adjusting his glasses. This man isn't just committing corporate theft. He's knee-deep in construction fraud. I blinked. Fraud? Roy nodded grimly. 2 years ago, he won a government contract to build 120 affordable homes in Georgia. The state advanced him $25 million. He built 40. Just 40. The rest of the money vanished. My hands flew to my mouth. Oh, Lord. He claimed there were delays, problems with suppliers, rising material costs. All lies, Roy continued. I've spoken to 3 families who paid deposits and never got their homes. They're suing him. The Anti-Corruption Bureau is preparing an arrest warrant. It's only a matter of time. I gripped the edge of the desk. How much time? 3 months, maybe less, Roy said. His company's collapsing. Workers haven't been paid in weeks. Equipment's being repossessed. He's living on borrowed air. He opened another envelope, and he still spends like a king. A new BMW last week, paid in cash. Where'd that money come from? Probably stolen accounts. The room swam. I thought of my son, Black Tato Jackson, who worked honestly for every dollar, about to marry into a family built on deceit. And his wife. I asked, does she know? Roy shook his head. No, she's in the dark. Probably too afraid or too loyal to ask questions. I pressed my palms together. And the mistress? She thinks he's divorced, Roy said. He's been lying to both women for years. I felt a tremor of disgust. 2 women, 2 homes, 2 sets of lies, all paid for by stolen money. That man isn't just unfaithful. He's dangerous. Roy leaned back. So what are you going to do, Mrs. Jackson? I didn't answer right away. Outside, the winter sun was dying behind the skyscrapers, the sky a bruised pink. I don't know, I said softly. If I tell my son, I'll ruin his wedding. If I stay quiet, he'll walk straight into disaster. Roy nodded. You're right. You can't stop this storm, but You can choose when to open the umbrella. He was right, Dad. I left his office with that folder clutched to my chest like a weapon I wasn't ready to use. That night, I walked the streets downtown, the city lights flickering in puddles after the rain. I could hear my son's laughter in my head, Sophia's soft voice calling me Mama Frida. They didn't deserve this. None of them did. I thought of the victims too, the families who trusted Sterling with their savings, the mothers who never received the homes they were promised, the workers unpaid for months. Justice wasn't just personal now. It was moral. By the time I reached home, I had decided one thing. I wouldn't expose him yet. But if Humphrey dared to humiliate my son again, even once, I'd take that microphone and burn his empire of lies to the ground. Weeks passed like a silent countdown. Every smile I gave was a disguise. Every church visit, every shopping trip with Sophia, every wedding plan, all of it was shadowed by the truth I carried in my closet. Then, one Saturday, Sophia called. Her voice cracked over the line. "Mrs. Jackson, can we talk? It's about my dad." We met at a little cafe off Peachtree Street. She looked exhausted, her eyes red. "He wants to control everything," she whispered. "He said our wedding isn't a celebration, it's a social event. He's cutting the guest list, removing Tito's cousins, his friends. He said he doesn't want ordinary people there." My throat tightened. "Ordinary people built this world, baby." She gave a sad laugh. My mom didn't say a word. She never does. "Then listen to me, Sophia," I said, holding her hands. "This wedding is yours, not his, not anyone else's. If he wants control, you take it back, even if it means doing things smaller, simpler, with love instead of vanity." Her voice broke. "I just want him to be proud of me." I touched her cheek. "He won't ever be not the way you need. Men like that only love reflections of themselves." When she left, I sat in that cafe for a long time, staring into the half-empty coffee cup, realizing how deep her pain ran and how cruel her father truly was. That night, I pulled the folder from my closet again. I spread the photos and documents across my bed. "That man doesn't deserve his daughter's love," I whispered. "He doesn't deserve anyone's." But I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not before her wedding. She needed one day of peace before her world broke open. 2 weeks later came the rehearsal dinner. Tato begged me to go. "Ma, please. I want you to meet everyone properly." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The Sterling's mansion rose from the hills like something out of a magazine, white columns, manicured lawns, a fountain spilling light. When I stepped inside, marble floors gleamed beneath my shoes. Paintings lined the walls. It smelled like money and secrets. Eleanor greeted me in a beige dress, smiling politely. "Mrs. Jackson, it's so lovely to see you." She kissed my cheek, her perfume elegant but heavy. "Sophia speaks so fondly of you," she added softly, and for a second, I glimpsed a woman living in quiet pain. Then Humphrey Sterling entered. Dark suit, gold watch. That same salesman's smile. "Mrs. Jackson," he boomed. "What an honor." He extended his hand. I shook it firmly. "Thank you for having me," I said, steady as stone. He raised his wine glass. "To my daughter," he began, "my pride and joy. And to her fiancé, humble, hard-working young man." The word humble rolled off his tongue like an insult. I saw my son's shoulders tighten. I lifted my glass but said nothing. When he locked eyes with me and said, "In this family, we value ambition," I met his gaze head on. And in mine, I replied, "We value honesty." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Dinner dragged on. Humphrey talked endlessly about contracts, golf trips, and politicians who owed him favors. Sophia sat quiet, eyes down. Eleanor smiled when she was supposed to. Every part of that home felt staged. As we stood to leave, Humphrey stopped me. "Mrs. Jackson, may I have a word?" He led me to his study, dark wood, heavy books, a desk too big for one man. He closed the door. "Your son's a good boy," he said. "Hardworking, respectful, but he has no future." My heart pounded. "Excuse me?" "He earns little, owns nothing, dreams small." "My daughter deserves better." "This marriage won't last." I stood. "My son has what you'll never understand: values, dignity, real love." He smirked. "Love doesn't pay the bills, Mrs. Jackson." "No," I said quietly, "but honesty lets you sleep at night." He stepped closer. "Let's be clear. I paid for this wedding. I pay for everything. Sophia will always depend on me because your son can't give her what she's used to. So don't forget who's in charge." I met his stare without flinching. "I understand exactly who thinks he's in charge." And I walked out. That night, back home, I hugged Tato when he said, "Ma, Sophia's worth it." "I know, baby," I whispered. "I know." But inside, I was already counting down the hours to the wedding day, the day Humphrey Sterling's kingdom would fall. The night after that dinner, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying Humphrey Sterling's smug voice echoing in that study. "Your son has no future." Those words cut deeper than he'd ever know. He didn't just insult my boy. He tried to define him. And I couldn't stand for that dot. For weeks I carried the truth like a hidden weapon, waiting for the right time to use it. I had seen the proof, every photo, every forged transfer, every stolen dollar, and I knew exactly who that man was. But the closer we got to the wedding, the heavier the secret became. It wasn't just a burden anymore. It was a ticking bomb. The days blurred together. My coffee went cold in the mornings. My appetite vanished. I would smile for my son, help him with wedding favors, reassure Sophia when she got overwhelmed, and then cry quietly after they left. Every time I looked at them, I saw love pure, patient, hopeful, and I feared what would happen when the truth came out. Then, one morning, my phone rang, double quotes, "Mrs. Jackson." Came Rye's familiar voice. "We need to meet." I found something else. My stomach tightened. How bad? Bad enough. When I arrived at his office, he didn't even bother with small talk. He slid a new folder across the desk. "The government contract," he said. "You remember the one for 120 affordable homes?" I nodded slowly. "Mr. Sterling only built 40. The rest of the money, $25 million, disappeared into fake shell accounts. He's under investigation. The Anti-Corruption Bureau already has an open file." I froze. "He stole millions of taxpayer money?" Roy nodded grimly. "There are families who put down payments and never got their homes. And now the Bureau's getting ready to move. He could be arrested within 3 months." The room spun. My hands trembled as I flipped through the evidence. Forged invoices. Government checks were routed to private accounts, even fake construction photos. Humphrey Sterling wasn't just corrupt, he was rotten to the core. Roy leaned back in his chair. "The company's collapsing. 2 months behind on payroll. Machinery repossessed. He's still pretending everything's fine, but he's out of time." He paused. "I don't think he even realizes the investigation's closing in. He's still out there buying cars, hosting parties, throwing money around like he's untouchable." I shook my head in disbelief. "And his wife? Does she know?" "Doubt it," Roy said. "Women like her, they live in mansions built on lies and call them homes." I rubbed my forehead, exhausted. He's been living 2 lives so long, he probably doesn't know which one is real anymore. Roy folded his hands. "You hired me to find the truth, and now you have it. So what are you going to do?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Wait for my moment. And when it comes, I'll end this man's empire with my own hands." 2 days later, I went to see my old friend Teresa, a lawyer I'd known for 20 years. She sat in her office surrounded by case files and the hum of a dusty ceiling fan. I placed the folders on her desk. I need your advice. She flipped through the papers silently, her brows furrowing deeper with every page. After a long pause, she looked up. Frida, this is explosive, I know. If you reveal this, you'll destroy that entire family. I know that too. She exhaled. Are you sure you want to go that far? I hesitated. I want to protect my son. But Sophia, she's innocent. She doesn't deserve to be crushed by her father's sins. Then tell her privately, Teresa said. I can't. Not before the wedding. It would break her heart. And if you stay silent, then my son walks blind into a house built on greed. And when it collapses, it'll bury him too. Teresa's eyes softened. There's no easy way out of this. I leaned forward, voice trembling but sure. Humphrey told me he was in charge. He said my son wasn't enough. He plans to humiliate him in front of everyone. I know it. I can feel it. She frowned. And what will you do? If he does, I'll expose him right there. No warning. No mercy. Teresa was silent for a moment. Then she said quietly, when you do that, he'll deny everything. He'll call you a liar, maybe even crazy. Are you prepared for that? I've been called worse, I said. But this time, I'll have proof. She nodded slowly. Then you need to make sure the evidence can't disappear. Have copies, witnesses, protect yourself. I already did. I told her I'd made 3 envelopes, one for my son, one for Sophia, one for Mrs. Sterling, each filled with copies of every document. If he tries to ruin my boy, I'll ruin his legacy. Teresa looked at me with something between fear and admiration. You're playing with fire. I know, I said softly. But sometimes the only way to stop a fire is to burn the house down yourself. The night before the wedding, Black Tato came home for dinner. He was jittery but glowing, straightening his tie even though he wasn't wearing a suit yet. Ma, tomorrow's the day, he said, grinning like a child. I smiled back. You ready? I think so. He laughed. I'm nervous, but happy. Sophia's happy too, even though her dad's still trying to control everything. That word control hit me like a punch. What's he done now? Nothing terrible. He just wants to give a speech. Says he has something important to say. I froze. There it was, the confirmation I didn't want but had expected. He was planning to humiliate my son publicly, probably to remind everyone that the Sterling name stood above the Jacksons that night. After Tato left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the 3 envelopes laid out in front of me. Each one was labeled in my neat handwriting. Tato, Sophia, Mrs. Sterling. Inside them was the truth paper bullets that could end a dynasty. For hours, I sat there asking myself, am I doing the right thing? Then I remembered every face in those photos. Every victim. Every family who never got their home. Every lie that man had told. And I remembered my son's trembling hands the day Humphrey called him an idiot. That was when I knew. This wasn't vengeance. It was justice. That night I dreamed. I saw the ballroom, the lights, Humphrey standing at the microphone with his glass raised, his smirk slicing through my son's heart. But this time in my dream, I stood too. I walked to that stage, took the mic from his hand, and spoke the truth loud enough for heaven to hear. When I woke up, my hands were shaking, but my resolve was steady. The sky outside my window was streaked with gold. The breeze moved my curtains softly. The city was waking up, and so was I. The day had come. The day justice would finally speak. The morning of the wedding came wrapped in sunlight so calm, it almost mocked what was about to happen. Atlanta glowed under a soft gold haze, and for a brief second, I wished I could pretend this day was simple, a mother watching her son marry the woman he loves. But I couldn't pretend anymore. Not after everything I knew. I stood by the window, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the 3 envelopes on my kitchen table. They looked small, harmless even. But I knew better. Inside each was a stormproof that could shatter reputations. End careers and set a family on fire. One for my son, Black Tato Jackson, who deserved the truth. One for Black Sophia Sterling, who deserved Freedom Dot, and one for Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, who deserved to finally open her eyes. I slid all 3 into my purse, zipped it shut, and took a deep breath. Today, truth was going to have a microphone. 2 days earlier, I had met again with Roy Mendez, the investigator. His voice on the phone had been urgent. "Mrs. Jackson, the situation's worse than we thought. You need to hear this before the wedding." When I walked into his office, he didn't even greet me with his usual nod. He just handed me another file. "The Anti-Corruption Bureau is finalizing their report," he said, tapping the folder. "They're going to indict Sterling soon. His company isn't just mismanaging funds anymore, it's a shell, a front. He's funneled millions into offshore accounts." My stomach twisted. How much? At least 12 million. Maybe more. The man's drowning in debt and still buying new cars, new suits, pretending nothing's wrong. He's trying to keep up appearances until he can't anymore. I sat down, feeling my pulse drum in my ears. And the government? They're building their case. Once the warrant comes through, they'll seize everything: his accounts, his assets, his reputation. But right now, only a handful of people know. He's still playing the big man, but the ground beneath him is cracking. I pressed my palm to my forehead. So on the outside, he looks successful. But on the inside, Roy finished for me. He's rotting. He leaned forward, voice low. "Mrs. Jackson, this isn't just about family scandal anymore. This is a criminal about to fall, and when he does, anyone attached to him will go down too. You need to protect your son. If Sterling gets desperate, he'll drag everyone with him." His words stayed with me long after I left his office. Protect your son. That night, I went to see Teresa, the lawyer friend who had helped me before. I told her everything Roy had uncovered. She listened quietly, eyes flicking over the evidence until she exhaled sharply. "Frida," she said, "this man's about to implode. But when he does, the shockwave will hit everyone, including your son, I know. Then you need to prepare. Because when you stand up to him, you're not just confronting arrogance, you're confronting power. He'll deny it, lie through his teeth, twist the story against you. Are you ready for that?" I've been ready since the night he called my son an idiot. She gave a sad smile. "Then do what you came to do. Just be smart about it. Keep copies of everything in multiple places. If he tries to silence you, your proof will speak louder." I nodded. It already does. I have the originals hidden under floorboards in my closet, the copies in my purse, and another set mailed to a friend's address out of town. Humphrey Sterling could scream, deny, or threaten all he wanted. The truth was bigger than his ego. By Friday night, the eve of the wedding, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was conviction. Tato came over for dinner, looking radiant and nervous all at once. He wore a pressed white shirt and couldn't stop fiddling with his cufflinks. "Ma," he said, smiling, "can you believe it? Tomorrow, Sophia becomes my wife." I smiled back, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I can believe it, baby. You worked for this kind of happiness." He grinned, then sighed. "Her dad's still being difficult, though. Wants to give a long speech at the reception. Says he has something important to say." I froze mid-breath. "Important?" "Yeah, but Sophia told him to keep it short. You know how he is, always trying to sound like he's the smartest man in the room." A chill crawled up my spine. That speech wasn't going to be about love or blessings. It would be another dagger. I could feel it, I touched my purse under the table. Let him talk, I murmured to myself. He has no idea what's coming. After Tato left that night, the house felt quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, those 3 envelopes spread in front of me like holy scripture. The TV murmured softly in the background. News anchors talking about another corruption scandal in some faraway city. And I thought, justice always comes for the arrogant. I opened one envelope just to look again. The photos, the wire transfers, the contracts with missing signatures. Veronica Campus smiling beside him like she believed every lie. It was all there, every piece of the puzzle that would finally expose him, but my hands trembled. Not out of fear, but out of the weight of what this would mean. I wasn't just destroying a man. I was ripping open a family, wounding a daughter who truly loved my son. I whispered to myself, Sophia doesn't deserve this, Lord, but she deserves the truth. Then I saw Tito's face in my mind, pride. The humility, the pain he tried to hide when Humphrey first humiliated him. And something inside me hardened. I stood, grabbed the envelopes, and slipped them back into my purse. This ends tomorrow, I said out loud. The lies, the cruelty, the control, all of it. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, watching the first light of dawn creep through the blinds. Outside, the world was quiet. Birds were waking up. The city felt clean, unaware that today one truth was going to change everything. When the clock struck 6, I rose, smoothed my dress, and tied my headscarf. My heart was steady. Today wasn't just my son's wedding day, it was judgment day for a man who thought. His power made him untouchable, and I was done being silent. Morning of the wedding was bright, too bright. Sunlight spilled across Atlanta like liquid gold, coating the world in a false peace that didn't belong to what was coming. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the creases from my pale lavender dress, hands trembling just enough to remind me I was human. Today wasn't just my son's wedding day. It was the day truth would finally walk into a room that had worshipped lies. I placed my hand over my purse, heavy with those 3 envelopes that had burned a hole through my conscience for weeks, and whispered a quiet prayer. Lord, don't let me lose myself today, but don't let me stay silent either. The church was packed. Marble floors gleamed beneath bouquets of white roses. The air smelled of lilac and expensive perfume. People whispered in pews, phones flashing like lightning as music filled the sanctuary. When Black Tato Jackson appeared at the altar in his tailored black suit, my chest swelled. My boy looked nervous but proud, his dark skin glowing under the light that streamed through stained glass. And then came Black Sophia, sterling beautiful, radiant, trembling with emotion. Her gown shimmered like moonlight, and when she saw my son, her whole face softened. The sight of them together almost made me forget the war waiting beyond those church doors. The ceremony was flawless. Every vow, every word, every tear seemed like a promise from heaven. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," the crowd erupted. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and for one perfect heartbeat, I allowed myself to believe that love could save them both. But I knew better. The reception was held at the Sterling Country Club, a place built for men like Humphrey Sterling, who thought marble walls could hide dirty money. Chandeliers dripped gold light from high ceilings, and the sound of violins floated over the murmur of laughter. I sat at a round table with family, pretending to enjoy the hors d'oeuvres, but my mind was elsewhere. Every second felt like a countdown. At the head table, Mr. Sterling looked untouchable. Crisp tuxedo, diamond cufflinks, that same smug smile he'd worn at the rehearsal dinner. His wife, Eleanor, sat beside him like a statue carved from grief, graceful, silent, unreadable. My son was radiant, his hand never leaving Sophia's. They danced, they laughed. They greeted guests who gushed over the perfect couple. I watched him spin her under the lights, and my heart broke knowing what truth would soon take from them. Then came the sound. The clinking of a glass. Tap, tap, tap. The room hushed instantly. Humphrey Sterling stood, wine glass in hand, smile sharpened like a blade. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice deep and commanding. I'd like to say a few words about my daughter and her new husband. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. I saw Sophia stiffen beside Tato, her hand tightening in his. My son forced a polite smile, unaware that he was about to be humiliated in front of everyone. Humphrey continued. When Sophia first told me she wanted to marry this young man, I'll admit I was surprised. My daughter has always had a taste for excellence, for finer things. And well, he smirked, let's just say this union is a lesson in compromise. A few nervous laughs scattered through the room. My jaw clenched. He went on, swirling his wine. Marriage, you see, is about balance. Some bring class, others bring effort. Some bring legacy, others potential. He looked directly at my son. And sometimes love blinds us to the truth. Sometimes it makes us do idiotic things. The laughter that followed was hesitant, forced, but still laughter. My son's face fell. Sophia's lips parted, mortified. The color drained from her cheeks, and that was it. That was the moment the line broke. Stood, slowly, deliberately. The room quieted again. Good evening, I said, my voice cutting through the air like glass. My name is Frida Jackson, the mother of the man you just called an idiot. 1,000 heads turned. Forks froze meter. Even the band stopped playing. Humphrey blinked, caught off guard. Mrs. Jackson, please, this isn't the... I held up a hand. You've had your turn, Mr. Sterling. Now it's mine. The silence in that ballroom was alive, buzzing, expectant, dangerous. You called my son an idiot, I said steadily. A man who works hard, pays his bills, and loves your daughter with every piece of his soul. You call that idiocy? Then let me tell you what real stupidity looks like. Murmurs swept the room. I reached into my purse and pulled out the first envelope. This is what your guests don't know. This is what your family doesn't know. But I do, because I found out what kind of man you really are. Humphrey's smile faltered. You're making a fool of yourself? No, I said sharply. You made a fool of your wife, of your daughter, of every worker who trusted you. Because you, Mr. Sterling, have 2 families. Gasps, hands covered mouths. Chairs scraped the floor. You have a wife here. I gestured toward Eleanor, and another woman, Veronica Campus, with whom you have 2 children, a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. You've been living 2 lives for years, using your company's money to pay for both. Eleanor Sterling rose from her seat, face pale as snow. Humphrey, what is she talking about? He stammered. She's lying, she's jealous. I held up photos, cold, undeniable truth. These pictures were taken by a private investigator. You with Veronica at her apartment. You at your son's soccer game. You wiring money to her account. Sophia covered her mouth, trembling. Daddy, please tell me this isn't true. I turned to her gently. I'm sorry, baby. I wish it wasn't. Humphrey lunged forward. You have no right. I stepped back, raising my voice. Oh, I have every right. Because you didn't just cheat on your wife. You cheated your workers. You cheated families who trusted you to build their homes. You stole from them. The crowd erupted, shocked voices, curses, disbelief. 2 years ago, I continued, you received $25 million from the government to build 120 affordable homes. You built 40. The rest of that money vanished into fake companies, offshore accounts, and your mistress's bank. Humphrey's face turned crimson. That's enough. No, it's not enough. I shouted, my voice breaking. Because there are people, good people, who lost everything while you pretended to be a man of class. And tonight, in front of your wife, your daughter, your investors, and your guests, I want everyone to see the truth behind your fancy suit. The air crackled. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is this true?" Others gasped as I handed copies of documents to nearby guests, proof of transfers. Company statements, legal filings. Humphrey tried to grab the papers, but hands stopped him. "You wanted a toast." "Mr. Sterling," I said, holding my glass high. "Here's mine to honesty, the one thing your money could never buy." Then I turned to my son. His eyes were wide, wet with shock. I touched his face. "You are not an idiot, baby. You were just too pure to see the world's corruption this close." I looked back at Humphrey. "You built your life on lies, and tonight those lies just ran out of room." I placed the microphone down gently and walked off the stage as chaos erupted behind me, guests shouting, reporters recording, Sophia crying into her mother's arms, and Humphrey Sterling shouting over the noise as security tried to calm the storm he had created. I didn't look back, not once, because when truth finally starts to speak, lies have no place left to hide. The moment I put that microphone down, the ballroom split apart like glass under a hammer. Voices rose in panic. Cameras flashed. The band stopped playing mid-note. Guests whispered, shouted, gasped, every sound sharp and frantic. Some people ran toward the exits. Others gathered in clusters, whispering the words, "two families and fraud," as if saying them quietly could soften their meaning. I stood still for one breath, watching the storm I had unleashed unfold before me. Humphrey Sterling was shouting, red-faced, trembling, spitting words I didn't even bother to hear. He grabbed for the papers, waving his hands wildly, trying to convince people it was all lies. "This woman is insane. She's trying to destroy my daughter's wedding." But the crowd didn't believe him. The evidence was in their hands, and the truth had a smell you couldn't hide. It was thick, undeniable, and raw. Sophia stood frozen, her white gown shimmering under the chandeliers, her makeup streaked with tears. She looked from her father to me to Tato, her voice small and broken. "Please, somebody tell me this isn't real." Tato didn't speak. His jaw was tight, his chest heaving. When he finally looked at me, there was so much pain in his eyes that I almost fell apart. "Ma," he said softly, his voice shaking. "What did you do?" The words pierced deeper than any insult ever could. I opened my mouth, but before I could explain, Sophia turned to her father. "Daddy, is it true?" Humphrey sneered. "Sweetheart, don't listen to her. This is just some jealous stunt. She's angry because you called my son an idiot," I said quietly, cutting him off. "And because you've spent your whole life thinking money makes you better than people who tell the truth." He lunged toward me. "You don't know who you're dealing with." 2 security guards moved between us before he could come closer. Behind him, his wife, Eleanor Sterling, was shaking, her hand clutching the back of a chair for balance. "You lied to me," she whispered. "All these years, you lied to me." He turned, desperate. "Eleanor, please listen." She slapped him hard. The sound cracked through the chaos like lightning. "Don't you dare say my name again." Guests gasped. Cameras turned toward her. The woman who had spent years living quietly in his shadow was suddenly blazing with fury. "You humiliated our daughter," she said, her voice trembling. "And now you have the nerve to act like she's the victim of someone else's lies." "I want you out of my sight, Humphrey." Humphrey stared at her, stunned. "You can't." "I can. And I will." Sophia sank into a chair, sobbing. My son knelt beside her, unsure whether to comfort her or keep his distance. I watched him reach for her hand, then hesitate. "Don't," she whispered. "Not right now, please." Tito's face broke. "Sophia, I didn't know." I swear I didn't know. I believe you, she said weakly, but everything's ruined. He looked at me then, anger and confusion swirling together. You couldn't wait, could you, Ma? You had to do it now. On this day, I tried to steady my voice. If I hadn't, he would have humiliated you in front of everyone. He was ready to destroy you, Tato. I couldn't let that happen. His eyes glistened. And what about Sophia? What about her family? You think this fixed anything? I swallowed hard. I didn't do this to destroy her. I did this to destroy him. He shook his head, stood and walked away, watching my son, my proud, kind-hearted boy turn his back on me, hurt worse than anything Humphrey Sterling had ever said. By the time I got home that night, the city outside felt quieter than ever. I took off my heels, set them by the door, and sat on the couch in the dark. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating texts. Missed calls, voicemails from reporters, relatives, even strangers. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Was it true? Did you really expose him? I didn't answer. I didn't even move. I just stared at the glow of the streetlights outside my window, wondering if I had done the right thing. Because truth has two sides. It cleanses, yes. But it also cuts. And tonight, I had cut deep. Days passed in silence. Then weeks. No word from my son. No calls, no visits. The newspapers had picked up the story. Construction mogul under investigation for fraud. Sterling family scandal rocks Atlanta elite. Humphrey Sterling's mugshot was everywhere. He looked smaller now, stripped of power, his eyes hollow. Justice, it seemed, was finally catching up, but justice didn't feel as sweet as I imagined. Sophia had gone into hiding, staying with her mother while the investigation unfolded. The wedding guests gave statements to the press, and the photos of that chaotic night went viral. Some people called me brave. Others called me cruel. I didn't care what they called me. I only cared about my son. I prayed every night for him to forgive me, for him to understand that I hadn't done it to shame him. I'd done it to protect him, but silence stretched on. Then one evening, a soft knock came at my door. When I opened it, Eleanor Sterling stood there dressed in black, her face pale but calm. "Mrs. Jackson," she said softly, "may I come in?" I nodded. She stepped inside and looked around my modest living room. "You were right," she said after a long pause. "About everything. The second family. The money. The lies." I said nothing. "They arrested him this morning," she continued. "The bureau finally moved in. The company's gone. The accounts are frozen. He'll be arraigned next week." I swallowed. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't," she said quietly. "You freed me." She sat on the couch beside me, her eyes glistening. "I spent years pretending not to see the signs. I thought I was protecting my daughter, protecting our name. But all I did was protect his shame." "You did what I couldn't." For the first time in weeks, I felt a tear slip down my cheek. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Sophia's angry, yes. But she's not angry forever. She just needs time. We both do." She stood and squeezed my hand before leaving. "You may have destroyed that wedding, Mrs. Jackson, but you saved a lot more than you realize." That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, staring out at the city lights. Justice had come, just like I'd promised myself. Humphrey Sterling was behind bars. The papers called me the mother who exposed the millionaire. But victory didn't feel like glory. It felt like silence, the kind that hums in your ears long after the shouting stops. Still, somewhere deep down, I knew it wasn't the end. Because truth doesn't just destroy, it rebuilds. And maybe, just maybe, when the dust settled, my son would see that. 2 months passed before the world began to breathe again. The headlines faded, the whispers died down, and the wreckage that Humphrey Sterling left behind finally began to settle into silence. He was gone behind bars. Stripped of his wealth, his reputation shattered beyond repair. His name, once spoken with reverence in Atlanta's elite circles, was now uttered only with disgust, but for the people he had hurt, his wife, his daughter, my son. And every worker he cheated, he had left scars money could never heal. As for me, I had spent those 2 months in solitude. No fancy visitors, no calls, no interviews. Just quiet mornings, black coffee, and the hum of forgiveness trying to find its way into my chest. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I saw Black Sophia Sterling standing there in a soft beige coat, her eyes red but peaceful. "Hi, Mrs. Jackson," she said gently. "Can I come in?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just nodded and stepped aside. She sat at the same kitchen table where she'd once laughed over dinner with me and Black Tato Jackson. But now her laughter was gone, replaced by something quieter, deeper. "I owe you an apology," she began. "And a thank you." I shook my head. "No, baby, you don't owe me anything." She met my eyes. "Yes, I do. You saved me." I didn't understand that at first. I was too angry, too hurt. "I thought you ruined my life." "But you didn't. You saved it." Tears gathered in my eyes. "You didn't deserve any of this." She took my hand. "Neither did you. You carried the truth when no one else had the courage. My mom told me what you did for us, how you gave her copies of everything so she'd have proof when the bureau came." I exhaled slowly. I just wanted to make sure justice didn't disappear once I spoke it out loud. She smiled faintly, and it didn't. My father's facing 30 years, and all the people he cheated are being repaid from what they seized. You were right, the truth always finds its way home. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she whispered, "Do you still hate him?" I thought for a long time before answering. "No," I said softly. "Hatred keeps him alive in your heart. I'd rather leave him buried where he belongs." Weeks later, my son finally came home. He looked tired, eyes shadowed, shoulders heavy, but when he saw me standing at the door, he smiled. "Ma," he said quietly. I didn't wait for another word. I pulled him into my arms and held him tight, the way I had when he was little and used to climb into my bed after nightmares. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I know I ruined your wedding day." He shook his head. "You didn't ruin anything. You saved me from marrying into a lie." I pulled back, searching his face. "You forgive me?" He smiled, eyes glassy. "You're my mother. I never stopped loving you. I just needed time to understand." We stood there, both crying, both smiling through it. Finally whole again. A few months later, Sophia called and asked if she could come by with Tato. When they walked in together, hand in hand, I almost couldn't believe it. They sat down across from me, and Sophia said, "We talked. We cried. We healed. And we realized something." "What's that?" I asked. "That love doesn't disappear just because the world falls apart." Tato said, his hand tightening around hers. Sophia nodded. "We want to get married again. No big ceremony. Just us. Something real this time." I felt the tears before I could stop them. "That's how it should have been from the start," I said. A month later, in a small backyard surrounded by spring flowers and warm sunlight, my son and Sophia stood beneath an arch of white lilies. No chandeliers, no photographers, no grand speeches. Just truth. Tato wore a simple gray suit. Sophia's gown was plain but beautiful, soft fabric that moved with the wind. I stood close, watching them exchange vows not rehearsed, not written by anyone else, but spoken straight from their hearts. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," I felt something inside me release a long, quiet ache that had been waiting for this peace. They kissed, and the small crowd, just family and close friends, applauded. Afterward, We ate homemade food, danced on the grass barefoot, and laughed under the string lights my son had hung himself. It wasn't a society event. It was a celebration of survival. Later that night, as the music faded and everyone left, Sophia sat beside me on the porch steps. I went to see him, she said quietly. I turned to her, startled. Your father? She nodded. At the jail. I had to. Not to forgive him yet, but to tell him that I would someday. That I refused to carry his sins on my shoulders. I nodded, proud of her strength. That's how you win, baby. Not with anger, but with peace. She smiled softly. He cried when I told him that. I think he finally realized what he lost. We sat in silence, listening to the crickets. The night warm and kind around us. When they drove away that night, I stayed on the porch long after the taillights disappeared. The moonlight washed over my yard, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt since before all this. Began dash peace. The kind that comes after. Storms. The kind that doesn't erase pain but honors it. The kind that lets you breathe again. By the time spring turned into summer, the trial began. The courthouse stood tall against the Atlanta sky-gray stone. Glass windows and a buzz of reporters waiting out front like flies drawn to a wound. Every morning, the news vans parked along Peachtree Street. Cameras pointed at the steps where once powerful men now walked in handcuffs. And on one of those mornings, Humphrey Sterling walked among them, head high but eyes hollow, wrists chained in front of him. The man who used to arrive at galas in tailored suits and black Escalades was now wearing a beige county jumpsuit and a look that said he finally knew what humiliation felt like. I was there. So was Black Tato Jackson, sitting beside me in the courtroom gallery. Across the aisle sat Black Sophia Sterling and her mother, Eleanor, both dressed in quiet grief. When the clerk called his name, the state versus Humphrey Sterling, the weight of everything he'd done filled that room like smoke. The prosecutor laid out the story piece by piece, the double ledgers, the shell companies, the stolen deposits from families who thought they were buying their dream homes. Photos flashed on the screen, contracts, bank transfers, text messages between him and Veronica Campus. Each one another nail in the coffin he built with his own greed. At one point, the prosecutor turned to me. Mrs. Jackson, thank you for your cooperation. Without your evidence, this case would have taken years longer. I nodded, silent but steady. Humphrey glared at me from his seat, eyes full of hatred and shame all at once. For a split second, I saw the man he used to be, confident, charming, untouchable. But that illusion cracked fast. What sat before me wasn't power. It was weakness pretending to be strength. When it was Eleanor's turn to testify, her voice trembled, but she never broke. I lived with a stranger for 25 years, she said softly. He lied about everything, his work, his money, his love. I was loyal to a man who wasn't even real. Then Sophia spoke. Her words silenced the courtroom. He was my father, she said, her voice calm but raw. And I loved him. But love doesn't excuse what he did to others. People trusted him with their homes, their families, their futures. And he destroyed them. That's not power. That's cowardice. Humphrey couldn't look at her. His head dropped into his hands when the verdict came. It was unanimous. Guilty. On all counts: fraud, embezzlement, falsifying contracts, and misuse of federal funds. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. Mr. Sterling, she said, you built your life on deceit. Today, you'll begin to rebuild it with truth behind bars. Sentence: 30 years in state prison. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Eleanor closed her eyes. Sophia gripped her mother's hand. Tato leaned back, exhaling deeply, relief and sorrow mixing like rain and smoke. As the bailiff led Humphrey away, he looked back one last time. His voice barely carried, but I heard it. You destroyed me, Frida. I met his eyes, calm and steady. No, you destroyed yourself. He didn't speak again. Life after the trial moved slowly, like healing after surgery, painful, necessary. Deliberate. Eleanor sold the mansion, moved into a quiet townhouse, and began volunteering at a women's shelter. It helps me remember who I am. She told me once over coffee. Sophia started teaching architecture at a community college. She designed small, affordable homes for single mothers, the very dream she once told me about when we first met. Her work was quiet but powerful. She built with purpose, not pride. As for Veronica Campus, the mistress, she left Atlanta with her children. The paper said she cooperated with investigators and used the seized funds to start over in another state. I didn't hate her. She'd been another victim of Humphrey's lies, and me, I went back to simple things. My garden, my church, my kitchen table that had heard too many secrets. But sometimes the past found me. One afternoon at the grocery store, a woman I didn't know stopped me by the produce aisle. Are you Mrs. Jackson? She asked. Yes, ma'am, I said cautiously. She smiled through tears. You don't know me, but because of what you did, I got my house back. I was one of the people Sterling scammed. They recovered part of my payment. I just wanted to thank you. Her words hit harder than I expected. You don't have to thank me, I said softly. Just live happy in that home. She shook her head. No, I do. You reminded the world that one voice, just one honest voice, can bring a giant down. After she walked away, I stood there between the apples and oranges, crying quietly into my sleeve. Months later, I visited the new home Tato and Sophia had built together, modest, warm, filled with sunlight and laughter. Their walls had no secrets, just framed photos and soft music playing from a small speaker in the kitchen. Sophia was 6 months pregnant then, her belly round beneath her floral dress. She smiled and placed my hand on it. He kicks when he hears your voice, she laughed. I smiled through tears. That's because he knows his grandma's the loudest one in the room. Tato grinned, wrapping an arm around her. We decided on a name, he said. What name? He looked at Sophia, and she answered softly, Michael. Michael Frida Jackson. After you. For the first time in a long while, I couldn't speak. I just hugged them both and whispered, then he's already blessed. As the months passed, justice continued its ripple. Other companies were investigated, new laws proposed, and people began to speak up about corruption that had long gone unchecked. I'd watch the news sometimes and think, one truth can change everything. And in the quiet moments, I'd realize something else. True justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the lives it mends, through the families it saves, through the babies born free of their fathers' sins. That was the real victory. The years rolled forward quietly after that summer, the chaos giving way to something softer: peace, purpose, and new beginnings. What once was scandal became story, and what once was pain became lesson. Justice had done its work. The headlines faded. The world moved on. But for us, for my family, it wasn't about forgetting. It was about growing in the light that truth had left behind. It was early autumn when Michael Frida Jackson was born. The hospital room was bathed in a soft morning glow. And when I first held him, everything I'd lost seemed to bloom again in that tiny heartbeat pressed against my chest. He was perfect brown skin like his father, sleepy eyes like his mother, and a calm energy that wrapped the whole room, and warmth. Black Tato Jackson stood by my side, smiling wider than I've ever seen. He looks like you, Mo, he said. I laughed. That boy looks like trouble already. Black Sophia Sterling smiled through her tears. We wanted to name him after the strongest woman we know. When I heard my name in that sentence, Frida, it didn't feel like pride. It felt like purpose. After Michael came home, Our family began to heal in full. The house echoed with laughter again, baby cries in the morning, jazz in the afternoon, the smell of collard greens and cornbread on Sundays. Every weekend, I'd sit on the porch with Sophia rocking the baby while Tato worked on projects in the yard. Sometimes Eleanor would visit too. She'd bring her own quiet smile and a peace offering of sweet potato pie. The four of us would sit there, talking like women who'd survived the same storm. One evening, Sophia looked out at the setting sun and said softly, "I've been speaking at architecture conferences lately." "Oh?" I asked. She nodded. "About ethics, honesty, and integrity in design. I tell them that buildings aren't the only things that need strong foundations. Families do too. Truth is the only blueprint that lasts." I smiled. "That's your daddy's opposite talking through you, baby." "You turned his ruin into your redemption?" She chuckled. "Maybe that's the point." Years passed, and Michael grew into a curious little boy, smart, fearless, always asking questions. One afternoon, when he was 5, he sat on my lap and asked, "Grandma, what's a secret?" The question stopped me. I looked into his big brown eyes and said, "A secret is something people hide because they're scared of the truth." He thought about it for a second. "Did you ever have a secret?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, baby, once. But when I told it, the world changed." He grinned, resting his head against me. "Then I'm gonna tell the truth, too." I kissed the top of his head. "That's all I'll ever ask of you." By the time Sophia became pregnant again, our lives were finally steady. Tita's engineering firm was thriving. Sophia's nonprofit housing projects were being funded across Georgia. Eleanor was writing a memoir about resilience and forgiveness, and me. I had everything I needed: family, peace, and the quiet knowing that I had stood up for what was right. One summer afternoon, Sophia invited me to speak at one of her conferences at Spelman College. The auditorium was full of students, professors, young architects eager to listen. She introduced me with tears in her eyes. "This is my mother-in-law, Frida Jackson, a woman who taught me that truth doesn't destroy, it rebuilds." When I walked to the stage, I didn't bring notes or a speech. I just spoke from the place where everything had begun. "I once believed silence was a kind of peace," I told them. "But silence can also be a prison." The day I spoke the truth, I thought I'd lost everything. But I gained my soul. You can't fix what you refuse to face. And you can't protect people with lies. Real love tells the truth, even when it hurts. When I finished, the room stood. The applause wasn't for me, it was for the truth that had outlived the pain. Years later, when I turned 70, I sat in my garden watching Michael chase fireflies. His little sister, Naomi, toddled after him, laughing in her pink sandals. The sun dipped behind the trees, painting everything gold. Sophia called from the porch, "Dinner's ready." And I looked back at them, my family, my redemption, my legacy. I thought of the woman I had been, the one trembling with a microphone in her hand, afraid but unyielding. I realized that version of me still lived here, in every breath of honesty that filled this house. I whispered a prayer of thanks. Then, as the wind stirred the leaves, I spoke softly more to the world than to anyone else. Don't ever be afraid of the truth. It might burn your world down for a while, but from those ashes, something honest always grows. And in the distance, I heard Michael laugh, the kind of laugh that sounded like freedom.